I would say that's what it's told. Okay. Okay, welcome to Did You Know, a Fireside Chat with Lorraine Eden. I'm Kristin Brandl. I'm the social chair of the EIBA 2020 online conference, but this is of course not just me who had the idea for the Fireside Chat, but as an entire team behind as well. The intention with these Fireside Chats was because we know that this is an online conference and it may be a little bit difficult to understand the more social parts of certain academics and not engage as much with fellow academics in the conference. We thought Fireside Chats would be a good way as well to maybe talk about other aspects than just research. Of course, we invited a lot of very well-known academics, so we will definitely talk about careers in the academic environment, but maybe from a different angle. And I am beyond thrilled that Lorraine Eden has agreed to do this first Fireside Chat with me. Lorraine, thank you so much for being here today and for participating and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So just to let you know what's going to happen. So I will introduce Lorraine and her career in a minute, and then we go straight into the questions. There will be at the end also the possibility for you to ask questions to Lorraine. So at the end, I will open up the floor and then you can also raise your hand and ask questions. And so we have a little bit of time set aside for the engagement for you as well with Lorraine. And then we summarize and that's it for today. So yes, the main kind of idea as well here with this Fireside Chat with Lorraine Eden is also to like support a little bit women in international business and in the international business environment. We also have a webinar, a workshop tomorrow, but today will be all about Lorraine's career. So the introduction to Lorraine, I think everyone probably has heard Lorraine's name before. Usually I would say that doesn't need to be much introduction, but I really want to just emphasize the importance here. Lorraine, born and raised in Canada, educated at Canadian universities, been or is professor emerita at the Texas A&M University, also research professor of law at the university. Her research is at the intersection of economics, international business, and public policy. And she is definitely most known for her being a founder for the field of transfer pricing economics. So her main research contribution really in the IB field has been related to transfer pricing as well and to furthering that field of transfer pricing economics. But she has also done quite a lot of work on strategies and structures of multinational enterprises, specifically related also to shocks and responses of firms. That's where the policy angle is coming in. She now researches a lot the digital economy. She does a lot of research on methods as well. And yeah, she's at an amazing research output as well, over 190 scholarly publications, 15,000 Google Scholar citations, multiple books, mostly related to transfer pricing as well, or research methods and ethics and ethical behaviors. And so from her research career and research perspective, absolutely stellar, amazing. And I'm glad she's here to talk to us, that we can learn as well, how do we get such an amazing research output. She's been teaching in international business economics and transfer pricing, of course, on all levels. And her professional service is, of course, quite intense as well, and mainly connected to the Academy of International Business. She is Dean of the IIB Fellows right now. She's been at the IIB Executive Board, has been IIB President, has been Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of International Business Studies, won multiple awards at the IIB, at the Women in IIB, outside of fellowships, US-Canada Fulbright Fellowship, and of course, most importantly for us here at the European International Business Academy, she's been honored in a research volume in 2019, the Progress in International Business Research. So I'm really excited that Lorraine has accepted and has joined us today. And I want to start with my first question right away and ask her, you started your career initially as an economist, and then you moved to the international business field. it would be really nice to know and understand what changed your mind, what triggered your interest in the international business field, and how has the beginning of your career really mapped out?
Well, first of all, Kristin, thank you for that long and exhausting review. I'm tired just listening to the things on the list. So, but I'm delighted to be here today and to have a chance to talk to folks at EIBA about some of the things I've done. And I hope that some of the things I say will be helpful for the younger people coming behind me. I think that's a really important thing for those of us who get more senior in years. It becomes more important to make sure that we're helping them, the younger, particularly for me, I think of the younger women coming behind us. So let me start with your first question, Kristin. Actually, yes, I have a PhD in economics. BA, MA, PhD in economics, started teaching in economics departments. I think what happened was my dissertation fell in my lap. And that's another story, but it did. And I was asked to write on transfer pricing. And because my potential dissertation chair was a world famous economist named Carl Schaup, I said yes. And so I worked under Carl. He was writing something at the time for the committee of experts at the United Nations for the group of 77 developing countries. And he'd been asked to do something on transfer pricing. So my first publications were all mathematical publications doing comparative statics analysis of transfer pricing and tariffs and corporate income tax differentials, very traditional economics. And then what happened is, frankly, Alan Rugman, and most of you will know Alan. Alan at the time was, I think he was at Dalhousie, and he called me and said, Lorraine, I'm running a conference on multinationals, and I think I'd like to do it on transfer pricing. Would you help me organize the conference? And if we do the conference, we'll do a book together. And we were both, as it turned out, roughly the same age, had not met. And so I said yes. And Alan and I did this conference together on multinationals and transfer pricing. And the book was published in 1985. And what I realized after the conference, it was in 83, I didn't know very much about multinationals at all. I knew a fair bit about transfer pricing, which was a really esoteric topic that nobody knew about then. And so I figured I needed to learn something about multinational enterprises, and my view and the best way to learn things is to teach them. So I actually offered an undergrad course on multinational enterprises. I was teaching at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario at the time, an undergraduate course on the multinational, and I used the Hood and Young book for that. And what happened was, because I was teaching that class, I got a phone call from Carleton University, from the School of International Affairs, who said to me, look, we're looking to hire somebody to teach a course on multinational enterprises, and we see that you're teaching one of the very few courses that exist on this. Would you be interested in being interviewed? Anyway, I ended up moving from economics to a graduate school of international affairs, where I ended up teaching with economists, political scientists, geographers, lawyers. I moved, in other words, from a very narrow econ department to a really multidisciplinary graduate school that taught no PhDs, just masters. And so my first segue was actually out of econ to international political economy and international affairs. And then what happened from that was that my network started to expand. I got a Fulbright and went to the Kennedy School. I met Ray Vernon. Ray invited me back for my Fulbright, and we team taught together. Alan introduced me to John Dunning. John Dunning and Ray and Alan all said I need to belong to the Academy of International Business. I was in econ at the time. And so I joined EIBA, I think in 1991. And then what happened is my marriage fell apart for various reasons, and I met someone else, and we went on he was American at Ohio State, we went on the market together, and in 1995, we both got hired by Texas A&M. So me, a Canadian, my whole life in Canadian universities, all of a sudden was headed down to the deep heart of Texas, and who hired me, because I was the trailing spouse. They were hiring my husband to start the school of public service and administration for George Herbert Walker Bush. So Chuck was hired as the founding director of the Bush School. So I was the trailing spouse. And as the trailing spouse, the management department hired me. And all of a sudden I discovered I'm in one of the world's best management departments. I dropped from being a full professor where I was back to being an associate professor for the move. I did come with tenure, but that's how what happened. Then when I got to the management department, I'd already been going to EIB for a couple of years and really felt much more at home. I went to AOM and was overwhelmed by the size of Academy of Management. I remember walking in to my first AOM reception, the opening. Most of you have probably done the same thing, walking into the first AOM reception. And it was a big, dark ballroom with the lights turned down low. And I walked into that room, and I don't like receptions anyway, never have. I'm an introvert, so I'm an INTJ, and I don't like receptions much. I walked into that dark room, realized I knew nobody. In 1990, I guess in 96, I turned around and walked right back out again. So my home for the last, since 1991, has been the Academy of International Business. And I think the reason why I like it is because it brings together people who were really interested in multinational enterprises as a unit of analysis. And unlike in economics, where the firm is a black box and you spend a lot of time doing the mathematics around it, in IB, there was lots of opportunity for me to work in finance, accounting, marketing. I could still do my political economy stuff. I was interested in M&E, state relations, and I really found a home with people who had interests that were similar to mine. So in some sense, I think what happened is I started in pure economics. Because I was teaching a course on multinationals, we moved to Ottawa. And I moved to a graduate school of international affairs, and then from then moved again down to Texas A&M, and I really sort of stayed with international business since then, and really do feel that has become my home. But I feel like I got one PhD in economics, and I feel like I've self-trained myself in a couple of other PhDs along the way, partly by teaching courses in the field. It's a good way to learn something, is to teach a course in it.
Yeah, that is very true, and I fully agree that the Academy of Management can be sometimes very scary, specifically
overwhelming.
Overwhelming and scary. And I fully agree. The smaller conferences like EIBA and EIB are definitely much nicer and more social as well for networking. So you then started and more also became the expert in transfer pricing, and became the founder of an entire theoretical area as well. So what are the challenges? I mean, I'm a young scholar. What am I supposed to do in order to get to that stage? What advice do you have for us, maybe also younger scholars, to overcome challenges along the way to really become known for a certain field and area?
That's a really interesting question. Let me start by saying, remember, my PhD fell in my lap. And so I really was one of there were 4 PhD dissertations written within, I think, 12 months of one another, within 24 months. And the 4 of us really were, I would see, founders of the field. One of them is I actually became a president of EIB, and that was Jeff Arpan, who was at South Carolina. Another one, it was Tom Horst, who then started Horst Associate, and he's worth more money than probably most of us because of getting out of academia and moving into the private sector. The 4th one, by the way, was a Japanese economist who stayed as an economist. So what happened is I was doing sort of pure economics. And one of the things you need to know about transfer pricing is it was an esoteric area. And while I found it really fascinating, nobody knew what it was. So for years, I was doing something where I always had to explain what I was talking about. And frankly, until about 10 years ago, that was the case. So the first hurdle was I did my dissertation in an area that I thought was really interesting, but nobody else did. And not only did they not think it was interesting, they didn't even know what it was. So I was perpetually explaining what it was that I was doing. The second more difficult thing, and this is particularly true for today where we're so used to data, there was no data. There was almost no real data sets available that you could use on transfer pricing. Very, very difficult. So most of the work I did was basically algebraic. Lots of algebraic manipulations of first and second order differential equations, trying to sort out propositions on this. And you could build your own hypothetical data set to test some of the numbers, but there really wasn't much data around on here. So frankly, what happened was I got bored. And you can start a dissertation. And what happens if nobody really cares what the subject is, and there isn't much good data for you to go on it, and you get tired of doing algebraic manipulations of equations, what happens is you drift off to other areas. And I did. When I moved to Carleton, I was in a capital city. What was happening is the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement was being negotiated. I was in the School of International Affairs, a hotbed for thinking about things about regional integration. I started writing. If you look at my CV, you'll see the transfer pricing stuff going like this, the regional integration stuff going like this as I moved over. And I really did write a lot of multinational strategies. I got interested in location decisions, in what plants did and what would happen if you formed free trade agreements. And that was the kind of work I was doing until we moved to Texas A&M. And once I got to Texas A&M and in a management department, things shifted again. For one thing, I got PhD students. I never had a PhD student until a couple of years after, probably 2000. I never had a PhD student before 2000. And what I discovered is PhD students have their own agendas. They have their own dissertation topics, right? And so what happens is you get interested and can work with PhD students. And I've had some very successful ones. Dan Lee, for example. So I've written things on strategic alliances from working with Dan. Lee Dye, for example, got me interested in war zones, and we started working on war zones. And you meet people. So I met Stuart Miller, and Stuart Miller and I had an interest in liability of foreignness and did stuff on liability of foreignness, and he had bank data. And so we started doing stuff on LOF and banks. So what happens is my transfer pricing, my first stage of my career, moves off to regional integration and then goes into sort of political economy of MNEs, and then goes into strategic alliances and liability of foreignness. And I wasn't doing much on transfer pricing. I was teaching it, teaching a couple of classes, guest lectures on it. I was actually doing some teaching for the Canadian government. And what happened was that started to pick up. I was teaching master's students in the Bush School. I had a lot of these fabulous foreign students, really great foreign students. And when they got their 2-year master's degree, they could not get a US job. It was impossible to get a US job. It's even harder now, of course. And what I discovered was if I taught them a course on multinational enterprises, they couldn't get a US job, which I did. If I taught them a course on NAFTA, wouldn't get them a US job. But if I taught a course on transfer pricing, what that did is transfer pricing was considered economics. And under the green card process, economists had, at that point in time, basically a free pass to come in and start on the green card process. So I got back into transfer pricing by offering a graduate course on it, frankly, because I had such amazing foreign students and I wanted them to be able to stay in the United States. So to do it right, what I needed to do was not only teach the course, but I had to teach stuff that was relevant to the practitioners. So this is how I got into doing it practically. I started talking to, first of all, the Ernst & Young in Houston, and the head of transfer pricing at EY in Houston, and said, will you help me design the course? And then if I have students, will you come and interview them? And frankly, I had, over the years I taught that course, about 350 graduate students, master's and PhD, and placed more than half of them in jobs. And so for me, that was really fabulous, because I all of a sudden got these transfer pricing Aggies that were getting jobs in the big four firms. Some of them were going back home and going to their national tax authorities, and they were spreading out over the world and progressing through the ranks. And so I now, the most senior of those students now are principals, and I don't think I have any partners yet, but they're principals in big four firms, which is, you know, they're obviously making 3 times what my salary was at Texas A&M. But that's how I started the network. I didn't really intend it. Maybe it's one of the things I think about. My career, I fell into things. I got invited to do stuff, and sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no. Some things had a lot of unintended consequences. Wanting to help my foreign students get US jobs led to me developing a network of transfer pricing professionals in big four firms who had my students, liked my students, and knew me. So I told you the story, Kristin. The very first professional transfer pricing conference I went to was a National Association of Business Economists. It's called NABE, and they had a transfer pricing symposium and invited me to speak on a panel. And that was about, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. So basically they get together about 200, 300 transfer pricing professionals, and I'm the only academic in the group. And what I realized, they knew me. And I thought, why would anybody know me? But they didn't know me. They knew my students. They had been interviewed. Some of them had guest lectured in my classes. And so an unintended consequence of teaching a subject that create jobs for people was it connected me with the professionals in the field. And then that just spiraled, and now I speak at many of these meetings.
Yeah, that is a perfect segue into my next question, really, because we were talking about, you know, you and the rigor of research and the publications and becoming an expert and moving over into really presenting work also at non-academic conferences at the United Nations and so forth. So how do you move over? How do you make this change of focus from really trying to contribute to the academic environment, which you still do, but then also maybe getting a little bit more relevance into your research?
Well, I think it's not easy, and best done, I think, in small stages. I guess the first of these I did was I was in Ottawa and involved in the free trade negotiations, and got invited to speak to the Foreign Affairs Department and talk about some research that we're doing. So bottom line is, if you're doing some research around a topic that is a hot topic for policymakers, you may get invited to come and talk to the policymakers about what you're doing. And so basically I was doing research I was doing anyway, but the research I was doing was related to the hot topic of the day, the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, and then later the NAFTA. And sometimes you can get these invitations. Would you come and talk to us about your research? We think your research is relevant. If you want to start that way, in other words, if we're starting over again, I think the thing you want to do is ask, what are the issues that people are paying attention to now? Obviously, COVID-19 is one, crises is another, the various types of shocks that we're going through. Another complete set is the digital transformation and what's happening to industries because of those firms that are born globals, or excuse me, born digitals, and now those ones that are going digital. So if you pay attention to what's going on in the Financial Times, in The Economist, in McKinsey, in some of the business magazines. Some of those things will resonate with you based on your current research topic. So my interest in multinational strategies and location strategies played into regional integration schemes on here. The work I was doing on liability of foreigners, finding a banking data set, led into things on corporate social responsibility and whether CSR was a coping mechanism for liability of foreigners. That work on CSR then led to other research in terms of thinking about the strategies of multinationals, particularly global multinationals, in terms of their branding, their global branding issues. And so in some sense, if you want to speak to other audiences other than academic audiences, you have to start by listening to them. And you have to ask yourself the question, what keeps them up at night? For me, it kind of happened again because I was teaching this class, I was having these visitors in, we would go for dinner and I would say, what's going on in the field? What are you talking about? What are the issues here? And then they got to know me a bit better and I could think whether anything I was doing in my research would be relevant to what they were doing. So for example, one of the things that happened was I got an invitation. I brought some people in from the IRS to talk to my students. That led to an introduction to people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics who were doing export and import price indexes. And they really had nothing on related party transactions. And they said, Lorraine, would you come and talk to us about, we want to think through how we could revise the US export and import price index mechanism to better take account of related party transactions. And out of that, I got my first real data set on transfer pricing. I got in-house data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the transaction level, with difficulty, of course, and could actually then start to do some work on transfer price manipulation. But I think you have to listen to the audiences and you have to be willing to go. I mean, think about it. One of the things I think we all are is we have enormous comfort in our existing friends and connections. You know, we know the people we know and we know how to talk to them and we know how to write papers with the people we write with. And so you can get in a rut, frankly, and in doing the same thing over and over again. But stretching out of that, like going to my first Academy of Management meeting and walking into a reception of, I don't know, 1,000 people in a dark room and walking out again, or being invited to go to an UNCTAD expert briefing where I'm asked to give comments and I have to think about whether I want to do that. You have to be willing to sort of say, yeah, I'm willing to step out of my comfort zone. Maybe I'm going to fall and be disastrous, but I'm going to learn something. And so I think it's the willingness to, in some sense, read outside what you normally read. And I'm talking about journals as well, too. Read across the journals and read books, talk to people outside of who you talk to, think about whether something you can do so you can build research teams of people that are in different areas too. I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, it talking to people and realizing that maybe I know something that might be helpful in solving a problem they have has been important.
Yeah, so this is kind of the driver for going out. How do you make sure that you also catch the audience and talk to them in a way? I think, as you said yourself, we're kind of always stuck in a certain academic way in approaching things and also talking about our research. How do you make sure that you grasp the audience as well and that you engage with them on their level? I mean, what for us not really knowing, what would you recommend us to kind of know and learn, and what did you struggle with maybe to talk to and present your work at a non-academic conference or audience?
I guess what I learned first of all is you have to learn the language. in our own fields, we know we have a language and things that mean one thing to us. And what I discovered when I started talking to Big Four, what I mean by that, I mean Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and the other large accounting consulting firms like McKinsey, for example, or NERA, they have their own language. And I often thought of it as, why would they want to even talk to me? I mean, I teach about this stuff, but I don't walk the walk, right? I talk the talk, but I don't walk the walk. They actually walk the walk. And what I've discovered was it really helps me in my teaching if I understand what people who were doing who really walk the walk. Now, so for example, if you're in strategy, your dissertation's in strategy and you're teaching strategic management, the walk really means you need to talk to executives. For me, talking to people who walk the walk meant I needed to talk to transfer pricing professionals, and I needed to talk to those in industry who were actually doing it inside multinationals. And there is a small group of them, and much larger now. Then I needed to talk to people in the large consulting groups, and I needed to talk to the policymakers, the tax authorities inside. And I started that by actually being invited to guest lecture for Revenue Canada. And so I started teaching classes, and these were, I guess the first one I taught was 1989 on this, with groups of actual tax authorities, the Canadian IRS, CRA is the Canadian IRS. What you learn is you got to know the language. So they would say something and I would have to be honest and say, I don't know what you mean. Can we talk and learn to talk each other? So I'm always reminded of Susan Strange's comment about the dialogue of the deaf. People in different disciplines don't talk to one another, partly because they don't know each other's language, right? So you have to learn and be willing to invest in learning the language, as well as what keeps people up at night. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, what I learned is I need to tell better stories, which actually has been helpful in my academic research. And of course, I learned that too as a JIBS editor. I think the most successful journal articles are the ones that tell the best stories. And telling a story is not easy. Let me give you just an example. Let's talk JIBS articles or AMJs or AMRs, for example. One of the things people have a really difficult time doing is writing the introduction and writing the conclusions to your paper, right? You can do you can write the propositions or the hypotheses, you can do the empirical work, but telling the story in a way that catches a reviewer in particular, and then the audience afterwards, is not easy. And people have a really hard time doing, what people call the 3-minute elevator speech. Tell me what your paper is about and why I should read that. It's not easy to do that. One of the things I learned in talking to practitioners is they're busy. They've got their own agenda. They don't have a whole lot of time. And I'd be better able to figure out how to tell them a story about how I can help and what I'm doing and why it might be relevant. Learning how to tell better, succinct, less jargon-full stories, more jargon-free stories, I think helped me also in terms of my own writing. I think I write better introductions and better conclusions to articles now than I used to do. The writing style is also kind of different. If you think about it, it's more like writing for The Economist. It is, you do need to tell a story. You need to have your facts. You need to write it in the right language, but it's very different. And the rewards are different. Let me give you an example. I now think about whether I really want to send something to a journal or I want to send it to a transfer pricing publication. Let me talk to you about the difference. If I send something I write to a journal, okay, it may sit for a bit while it goes through the reviewing editor who decides whether or not it's appropriate for the journal. And then somebody has to send it out for review. And maybe it goes through 3 rounds of reviews. In all 3 rounds of those reviews, I'm going to get a list of, 7 or 8 pages of revisions that people want. And I'm going to go through that. And I'm going to go through that. And then maybe at the end of the day, I might get a publication that goes online after spending hours and hours with a copy editor from somewhere, trying to get the copy editing right, it may eventually appear 4 years after I wrote it. Mm. And then maybe, depending upon where I published it, it gets read or it doesn't get read. Mm. So things that I started on, and then that's assuming the first journal takes it. The first journal that turns it down somewhere along the line after first review, second review, third review. I've even had articles turned down at the 4th stage of review, which horrifies me and I think should horrify all of us in this profession. It means that the piece you actually wrote that you were interested in 10 years ago finally appears in print. Now, if you do this for, as I am right now, let me talk to you a little bit about what I'm doing right now. I'm retired now, so it's like being on permanent sabbatical leave, and I don't have to write for 5 top tier journals anymore. I can write for what I like, and I can do what I like in terms of research. And so I'm back doing transfer pricing much of the time now. And it's a huge issue going. The #1 issue among transfer pricing professionals worldwide right now is something probably nobody in this room knows anything about. If I say to you pillar 1 and pillar 2 blueprints, anybody that knows what that means, please hold their hands. I suspect there's nobody in this room. It has occupied transfer pricing professionals for 2 years now. The OECD has come down with a variety of proposals on how to tax digital transactions. And the current proposals, which are called the blueprints, came out on Canadian Thanksgiving. And comments are due to the OECD on Monday. Monday's December the 14th. So I am madly rushing to try and get my comments done and in by Monday. The way I've been doing this for the last 2 years, because this is my 3rd round of submitting comments to the OECD on this, is first of all, I should say, I care a lot about what's happening. The OECD is proposing major changes in the way that multinational enterprises are taxed globally. Almost nobody in the academic world knows this or cares about this, but multinational enterprises, this is keeping them up at night, tax authorities, big 4 consulting firms, and me, because I actually have, this is an area where I have views, kind of interesting. As an academic, I actually have public policy views on something and want to make my voice heard. And what I learned was, and this is actually really interesting, Kristin, as an academic, if you spent your years in academia and you've paid your dues and you've become a full professor and done some things, people listen to you. I didn't expect that. But what I've learned is people outside in the real world see you as a disinterested, I don't want to say, I guess the word is disinterested party. In other words, you can be more like a judge, like you can stand outside, evaluate the pros and cons. You're not beholden to any of the parties. And frankly, you can say what you think. And so one of the wonderful things about moving over to doing some professional work is if I have views on something, I can be the little girl in the room who stands up and says the emperor has no clothes. And I've been doing that for 2 years now. I don't think I've endeared myself very much to the OECD Secretariat, but I actually think they're moving in the wrong way on handling how multinationals should be taxed, particularly digital multinationals like the big digitals like our Facebooks and Googles and Amazons. And so what I've been doing is writing short pieces, not sending them to academic journals, because if I send them to academic journals, they won't appear in time. They'll go into this 4-year pipeline before they come out the other end, and that's too late. If you want to be an academic and you want to say a piece and you want to affect policy, you can't go through the journals. It's too slow. You actually have to, and besides then, not only is it too slow, the policymakers don't read them. So much as I love Jibs and I write for Jibs, I was Jibs editor, I review for JIBs. I will continue to send things to JIBs. My transfer pricing professionals in that field won't read JIBs.
Lorraine? I was fearing this would be happening. Lorraine? Now that it got interesting, when we know and the criticism.
We'll just need to give her a little bit of time. I'm sure she will log in again. Can talk about other stuff.
We can talk about questions as well. So I will. We're 45 minutes in the talk, so my intention was to kind of wrap up the talk a little bit now, and then let the audience ask questions. So if you want to maybe start thinking about questions and preparing some questions which you would like to ask Lorraine, that would be perfect. I will ask you to speak. You can put it in the chat as well, so I know what you want to ask, but I will probably call you up to ask your question personally. That is very sad now that it really got interesting.
It takes a little bit of time to go through all the links, so I'm sure she will.
Let's give her another couple of minutes. I remember the last time when I spoke to her, we really had some technical issues as well. So if she's not back maybe in the next 3-4 minutes, then.
Kristin, we could also just take 3 minutes bio break, all of us, and then come back in 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and see if she's here.
Actually, that is a good idea. Just in case she's not coming back, then, and because this is recorded, oh, maybe I can pause it. Yeah, I will pause the recording. Let's give her 2-3 minutes, and don't go too far. And see if she's not coming back, then I will wrap up, because I think there are quite a lot of insights as well, which I would like to summarize quickly. Okay, I think I'm pausing.
Break.
Looks like the internet went down at the house, and so it's just come back on. The complete Wi-Fi went. I think I am back in. So
You are
hopefully the
yes.
quality will be okay. I'm sorry. Where was I? Oh, I was talking about articles in business and Bloomberg Tax, which is owned by Bloomberg. Those things can come out very quickly. I do always use friendly review to ensure that I haven't made mistakes so in effect, I do the review process myself, although it's single blind reviewed, not double blind reviewed. And what I then find out is the things I have been writing are having an impact. Frankly, I think sometimes it takes one person to stand up and say the emperor has no clothes, and then other people are more willing to do the same too. So let me bring this back to talking about young people thinking about this. What I've tried to say is I started out doing transfer pricing as a pure academic play, and was writing articles in Canadian Journal of Economics and things like that. I then started teaching it. And I started teaching it in order to learn more about it myself and to learn about multinationals more myself, and then got invited to do some teaching with Canada Revenue Agency, CRA. And that was my first real introduction to people who did this for a living, who walk the walk, not talk the talk. They were the auditors of the multinationals, right? I had to learn a new language in order to be able to talk to them. And that was really, really kind of interesting. And I went from that to teaching a graduate seminar at Texas A&M, and then having these foreign students, I wanted to get jobs, and then started bringing in Big Four transfer pricing professionals, particularly from Ernst & Young. I had a very good relationship with E&Y in terms of hiring my students. That then opened up a network. And as my students graduated and got jobs.
Oh no. Okay. It's probably went down again. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap up the 3-4 points, which I heard out of the discussion as well. And I know that these were kind of the points as well where we wanted to get at out of this entire fireside chat. And then once Lorraine is coming back, we move straight into questions from the audience, so that we don't need to repeat this. And we have more time as well for you to ask questions to Lorraine. So I think that the 3-4 main points, which we kind of discussed as well in advance, and we thought was really interesting as well to be the overall, I would say, takeaways or concluding summary for the session, was that in Lorraine's case, she really started being a very narrow academic, moving into that very broad field, international business, branching out and focusing really on rigor and publishing and building up this this network and the research foundation. And then later on started to really narrow down again and focus more on the relevance and the impact of research and changing basically the direction and attraction of what to publish and where to publish and what to focus on with the research as well. But the reason she could do that was really based on a variety of very significant factors in her case, such as the possibility of speaking to transfer pricing practitioners and teaching them and educating them. So the engagement she had with individual people, which helped her as well to kind of understand the importance and the implications and taking maybe different perspectives, talking to outside individuals as well. She changed the way her writing was meant to attract a certain audience, something which we didn't talk about, but I know is also she changed the way she approaches methods and a methodology and trying to understand also how to move from this rigor to relevance kind of aspect and how the research can be used in a more practical and policy related sense. And then the last thing really though is, and this is specifically also important for all the young academics, is that unfortunately, you know, you have to receive or you have to get, and she used quite a lot of her status and expertise to get to that stage. And that's possibly because she focused on this rigor before she moved into relevance. Is she back?
I'm back, believe it or not. It's clear we're on Suddenlink. I don't know if anybody else is on Suddenlink, but you need to know Suddenlink is not reliable. Anyway, maybe they're doing some work on a pole outside. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. Anyway, let me pick up and apologize for this up and down. My thoughts was,
Lorraine, one second. Maybe we can round it up now and then allow also the audience to some questions afterwards.
Sure.
If you summarize it at the end. So I kind of did a quick summary already, saying that from narrow to from rigor to relevance and the movement with from the people and the research approach and methods and status and expertise. That's kind of the 3 points I thought I outlined to emphasize how that move actually happened and was possible from the academic rigor side to the relevance and the implications and relevance. But if you want to maybe conclude it, then we can go over with questions from the audience.
Sure. My point in saying and thinking about this is to say, I think as the universe, well, maybe the way to look forward. If you're a young person now starting out in your career, you have to you have to go through the hoops to get tenure. You need to publish in the right journals. This is part of, what you must do as an academic. Oh my Lord, here we go again. No, there it is. And so I thought I'd gone down again, but it seems to be okay.
Oh, you're here. You're here.
Once you're tenured, I think it's possible then to start branching out, to start thinking about reading more broadly and paying attention to the professional conversations that are going out there. What keeps multinational executives up at night? What keeps UNCTAD folks worrying about public policy issues up? What keeps your local tax authority up at night? Whenever you're research passionate about, find and talk to people who are doing this in the field. And then the third thing I did, and I really, as I said, fell into it for a completely different reason. If you can create a master's level course, could be a quarter course, could be longer, and then bring in those professionals to the course. So I brought them into guest lecture, I brought them into interview and hire my students. And so you start, in effect, developing a second network, not just of your academic colleagues, but of the people who are really doing this for a living out there in the real world. And then they then will start inviting you. And you, the dialogue of the deaf goes away, and you can start talking in their language about their issues. And those things then can offer opportunities to speak at places you wouldn't normally speak and meet and work with people you wouldn't normally work. So for example, I've started writing papers with the head of transfer, or was at the time, the head of transfer pricing for Dell Technologies in Austin, Niraja Srinivasan. And we did a paper together on Internet of Things. She's an IoT expert because Dell does a lot of IoT. And we have, I think, a really interesting paper written, published in Bloomberg Tax on Internet of Things. Has that spilled over for me? Yes, both in terms of my research I do for scholarly work and in terms of the professional work I do. In some sense, I think you can do a two-track career. And one track where you're doing the traditional academic, another track where you're broadening out to whatever the professional audience is for what you are doing yourself. And I think that becomes a really interesting, and you bring it back to the classroom. You bring it back to your research because it informs the way you write, because you know what's going on out in the field here in terms of interest. So for me, this has been, I think, it's had win-win benefits all around. It's not easy, as I said, and I frankly didn't start out that way. I fell into it, and most of these steps I fell into. But I think it's much richer and rewarding. And, you know, as I said, I retired in August 2019. So I've been retired for more than a year now. And a couple of years, 4 or 5 years before I started retiring, I started to think, what did I really want to do post-retirement? I'm not a golfer. I cruise, you know, I haven't cruised once, not going to do a lot of it. I'm traveling, I've done a lot of traveling already. So my intention was basically to treat my retirement as a sabbatical leave. I'm on permanent sabbatical. I can write on what I like. And so the question is, what did I want to do? And I decided I wanted to write on things that I thought might make a difference in the world around me. And I wanted to build on what I knew. And so I know about transfer pricing and international tax. And I'm still writing academic journals and still writing with my colleagues, but I deliberately am, and as I said, in this particular, I planned to write a textbook on transfer pricing, but got segued into the fact that the OECD was making policy proposal changes that I vehemently disagreed with, and therefore decided I was actually going to say what I thought should be going on and why the proposals wouldn't work. And that has been a really fascinating experience to be an academic and have some credibility in the field and be able to be at the margins. Now, it doesn't mean that the OECD won't go ahead with this eventually anyway. It might with some of the things that I'm not wild about. But I have been having fun writing about it. And I would urge you, if you're interested, I do try to keep an updated website, and you're welcome to look. I will mention one other thing I've done, and then I will stop. I got invited to work with the analysis group. The analysis group hires academics all over the world who are experts in a particular topic that might go to court. And so you are asked to provide outside written reports for which you were paid. And so I've been working in the analysis group, I don't know, maybe about 10 years now. And it's given me the opportunity to do maybe a dozen reports, which again provides a link to opening and talking to people in the real world about this. I always stayed within the consulting guidelines at Texas A&M. There's a limit on how much you can do. So I never had a problem in terms of that. And I would urge anybody not to start consulting until they're full professor. And then once they are, keep within the limits that the university opposes. But I have had the opportunity to actually be involved in 2 court cases. And that was truly a deep dive into understanding how transfer pricing is done inside firms. So my view here, I think, is there's a lot of benefit and I should say fun. One of the things I want to do when I retired was things that were fun. And I find research fun. And I will say one last thing, because this may also be helpful. The most difficult thing I have ever done in my life as a professional, as an academic, has been to testify in court and to be deposed. The closest experience I had was defending my PhD dissertation. And when you defend your PhD dissertation, everybody in the room is a friend and wants you to graduate. When you get deposed or when you testify in court, you're up against adversaries who want you to trip over your words and lose. And that experience is like walking a tightrope. And in our field, we don't have very many opportunities to walk tightropes and do really risky things. And so for me, that has been, and I'm happy to talk to people with that experience too, that has also been a really interesting challenge. So I think I get bored, and I think we can get bored with the things we do over and over again. And reaching outside and learning new things and grow is a way we grow. And so I've always been interested in learning new things, but I've also wanted to get my students jobs, and both my PhD students and my master's students, and to pay back and to make contributions. I think we all kind of want to make a difference in this world so that when we're gone, you know, we did something that stays behind us. So I'll stop here, Kristin, and I'm happy to answer questions of
Absolutely.
This is we have about half an hour, so
now this
time for questions.
Absolutely, the perfect segue to ask question, the perfect closing as well. This was amazing, Lorraine. I'm opening up the floor now. I know there have been some questions put in the chat already. I think John was one of the first, so I would like to ask John to maybe raise his question. If you have any questions, please put up your hand so I can call you up, or write it in the chat. John?
Hi. Thank you, Lorraine. This was fascinating. I really, very much enjoyed this. My question is what do you see as the next big challenge for IB scholarship?
Oh, I think, and this isn't just for IB scholarship, but I think it's for most of us anybody who's not retired in the universities, is maintaining your relevance as we emerge out of COVID-19, but the universities decide they would still like to just do online distance ed. I think with both the digital revolution that's underway now, the students graduating today are not going to have what I had, which was a room with 20 or 30 students in it and blackboards and chalk and teach them that way. We're all going to be doing more things online on Zoom, and there'll be more ways for students to learn besides us. And so it's not clear to me that the universities are going to continue to want to pay our salaries, and many of the IB salaries are pretty high, not as high as in finance and accounting, of course, but decent. And there'll be more part-timers teaching. So more PhD students graduating who are going to have a hard time finding jobs. And of course, in England now, the tenure system is gone. So bottom line is, what I think the research we do is going to be important in keeping our jobs, more so than it has been. You could write for a journal on a particularly esoteric topic that nobody ever read except you and maybe your mother, and it wouldn't matter as long as you had a group of scholars all writing on the same topic and supporting each other in the journals. I think going forward, that's not going to be the case. There's going to be too many other alternatives for students to learn. And the universities are getting money and grants from governments is way down. I think Texas A&M gets 7% of its money from the state now, and the rest of it comes from former students and grants. So what that means to me is we need to do more relevant research. And Ann Suey, and the second reason, frankly, is Ann Suey's network, the Responsible Research in Business and Management, RRBM. That group of scholars, of which I am a member, is really arguing we can't do research that dances on the head of a pin anymore. We have to show that we're not only doing things rigorously, that we have relevance in what we do. So my falling into this kind of career, frankly, because I accepted a dissertation topic because there was a famous scholar coming to Dalhousie University who was worldwide known, and he needed to write a report on transfer pricing because he was sitting on a committee at the UN, and which is kind of how I fell into this and the things I did, that we now need, I think if you're a young person in this field, to take an active role in making yourself more relevant. And I think IB scholarship, if it's to survive, has to address the big challenges of crises, of digitalization, of where things in the world are moving around us. I don't know if that answers your question, John, but come back to me if it hasn't.
No, that's good. I also wanted to put in a plug in and for inquiries into sustainable development also, so as encourage people to come to that workshop tomorrow that you also will be participating in.
Yes, there's quite a group of us all speaking on the Sustainable Development Workshop. Really looking forward to it. And I will put a plug in for the event studies one too. And then Elaine Verbecki and I are on a panel with Gracia talking about theory and IB also. And that's also on New Directions in Theory. I'm going to talk more about events there.
Tomorrow will be a busy day, and there's quite a lot of really interesting workshops. I don't even know. I'm so sad that I have to pick. It's so difficult to pick as well. I would have loved to come to John's, but I have mine at the same time, so it's kind of, it doesn't really work. And so yeah.
So we can listen. One of the real advantages of this platform is you can watch it after. And that's very cool. And I don't think that's going to go away. This opportunity is going to be with us going forward.
So we have a question from Cordula as well. Cordula, if you want to unmute yourself, and oh, you already are, perfect. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this amazing account of actually navigating through life with some excellence and probably a lot of luck as well. And I want to ask you, what can you give younger scholars as advice? Because I think it's getting harder and harder to have everything balanced. If you think about work success and also the family part, because I have seen now younger scholars, when they get to have the family and they also have a strong pressure on top journal publications and developing their expertise, like you have nicely described, some people actually break. And I definitely don't think that this is actually interesting to stay motivated for us in academia if we have those examples. So what would be your recommendations to really keep that balance?
I think it's a great question, Cordula. Thank you for asking. I guess my way of thinking about this is, I guess I think of life as having rhythms. And there are things we do at one stage of our career that are not relevant for the next stage and may come back and be relevant again. So a young person focused on, getting a PhD student, needing to get through to the tenure process has certain things that they must do, right? They don't have a choice. They have to teach and they have to be a decent teacher. They have to write and they have to publish in the journals where their department expects them to publish, right? They don't need to do any professional service. They really don't and should avoid it. They're probably having children. And women, as we know, shoulder the vast bulk of the burden with children. I had one daughter and raised her. So I think at that stage of the life, women are very busy and they're very focused on just getting through the day and getting through the week and maybe having a little bit of time, a few minutes once a week to themselves, to whatever. Once you move into the next sort of stage of your life, there is, you're tenured and you're on that process. You're still on the wheel of, you got to get from tenured to getting to full professor, right? But you start branching out and things, you can start what I did by fluke, which is really start paying attention to the world around you and what the professionals in that world are doing and start trying to build some of those connections. I've always been attracted to the argument that you need a posse. You need a group of people who are basically your generation going through with you that you can talk to and cry on their shoulders if necessary. You also need mentors. And I think mentors have been really important in my own life. Obviously my dissertation chair being one of the very first ones, Carl Schaup. But Alan Rugman was a mentor of mine. John Dunning was a mentor. Ray Vernon was a mentor for me. So having mentors in your life that, if you're trying to decide whether to do something or not do something, you can go to them and discuss it is important. So my advice would be, think about life as having a rhythm. Things that you are important for one stage can go away and come back later, and that's okay. It's okay when you're young and you've got kids to spend the bulk of the time on those kids. They're going to grow up. They do grow up and they do become self-sufficient. And you then have more free time for other things. And there is a stage where you really want to give back in terms of professional associations, where you want to get involved in journals, where you want to be the editor of a journal, if you can. It's a wonderful learning experience. And then your research changes. Your research with the people around you. You want to move. I would not stay on one place. I moved maybe too many times in my career. But I recommend moving because it shakes things up, opens you to new ideas. I guess I would say, be prepared for a rhythm. And maybe what I should say, particularly to the women, I think we all worry too much and we're too hard on ourselves. We are way too hard on ourselves. We need to pat ourselves on the back and pat our sisters on the back more often for their accomplishments. We need to celebrate and give each other, I guess, the benefit of the doubt when things, because there is an up and down. In my own life, I would argue things do happen in rhythms. There's lots of good things that happen at one time, and then sometimes other things are more difficult. We need to celebrate the good times. But frankly, I guess as I look back on my life now, I wish I had worried less. I worried a lot. And I was up at night worrying about things that in hindsight were a waste of energy. So another piece of advice would be worry less. Do more or do the same, but worry less and be a little bit more relaxed and think of your career. It's not a sprint. It really is a marathon. You're here for the long haul, and there will be some uphill parts that are more difficult, and then there'll be other parts where things really are going fine. And be open to the side roads that come up, the opportunities that come up. I've accepted a lot of those opportunities. Some of them didn't work out, some of them did. But I guess I've kind of been a believer that when the brass ring goes overhead and somebody offers, would you be interested in doing something? I will evaluate the benefits and costs, not for myself, but for my family. And if it's okay and we're all in agreement, we'll move. And so we'll shift places, and I'll do things I didn't do before. Some things I've turned down, you know, and thankfully later on, I was glad I did. But that would be one piece of advice I would have is, Cordula, is, you know, see life as a long journey with rhythms, ups and downs. Give yourself more pats on the back and don't worry so much.
That's perfect advice. I should tell myself that all the time, because I wake up at night thinking, oh my God, I didn't.
Worrying. Yes.
Thank you so much for a great answer. We have one more question. I don't know, Gretchen, are you still here? And yes, perfect.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, definitely. Ask away.
So thank you, Lorraine, for your contribution. I basically, my question is just, you know, what should we not waste our time and effort with? And I think you've actually answered that question in your last couple of answers to the other questions. Don't worry, and don't do research that dances on the head of a pin.
Right.
But I will say that I find it really challenging to try not to become bogged down in the process of trying to get a tenure track position. As you mentioned, they're becoming more and more difficult to get. And at the same time, trying to remain academically qualified without ever having a guarantee that that's really going to have the impact that you want it to have. So I guess I'll just leave the question as broad as it actually is, and maybe you have something else to say to that. What would you recommend we don't focus energy and effort on in retrospect?
Okay, that's a great question too. Thank you, Gretchen. I guess a couple things. I've always been interested in tons of topics. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I just have lots of interests, and much of my life has been in departments where people were doing a variety of things that I could possibly have done work with them on. So there were lots of opportunities to do co-work. I guess one of the things I would say is try not to get too distracted, in that you really do need to evaluate how much time something is going to take. Offers will come along that will take a lot of time, where the rewards may be fairly limited. And you really need to be able to say no. One of the things that happens, of course, and this is a really good example for most women, particularly once you've got tenure, is the invitations to get on committees in the university start to skyrocket. And that can be an enormous time suck. Frankly, I've been on senates, I've been on the board of regents. I was a department chair for a while. What I've learned is try to avoid getting onto things that really would take an enormous amount of time, particularly in committee work with lots and lots of committees, where at the end of the day, you probably aren't going to have any opportunity to influence it anyway. And get on the ones you want. So in other words, I wish in some sense I had been more proactive in saying, okay, here's the range of committees that I know I'm going to be asked to do once I get tenure. Which ones do I really want to be on? Either because they're a real interest of mine or because I think I can make a difference. And then how do I get myself on those committees? And how do I avoid getting myself on the ones that are really just basically a time suck? Okay. And there's where your department head can be really helpful. If you go and have a talk to your department head and say, look, we know women sit on far too many committees. How do you help? I need your help and protection, and in terms of being able to say no to this. That if you really need me on this committee, I need you to tell me yes. But if you don't really need me and you're just looking for somebody, to fill the space, please, get me off this committee. So that is one way. And the same thing with research projects. I have evaluated some research projects and decided they weren't going anywhere. So you may start a research project with a group, and for whatever reason, it's not going somewhere. It might be your fault, might be somebody's fault, but at some point in time, you have to say, this was a learning experience. I'm glad that we did it together. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but maybe what we need to do is really move on. I also think you need to pay attention to your co-authors and decide who's really pulling the weight. And, you know, if you have co-authors who really aren't pulling the weight, then on new projects going forward, you reconstruct your teams on here. So in some sense, I guess what I'm saying is, I'll give you another example. I've started 3 professional associations over my career. I think all 3 of them are still in existence, WAVE being the largest and by far the most successful. I'll give you an example of, I have ideas from time to time on more. So I realized there is no professional association of transfer pricing professionals. It doesn't exist, okay? There is no US one, there's no state one, there is no such entity. And so for a while, I talked to people a few years ago about starting one, and everybody was very keen. Lorraine, why don't you start an association of transfer pricing professionals? And I realized how much time and effort was going to be involved in that, and said, this is not a good use of my time. I do not want to start an association where I'm, you know, running the association. It was good to start it for WAVE. We did it for a couple of years, and then we got its own executive, and I stepped outside of that. So you need to sort of, even when you have your own, you have lots of ideas, you need to stand back and really rationally assess your own idea, and frankly, talk to your spouse, which was one of the reasons why I nixed that one. He didn't think it was a good idea, and he was right. And also talk to your mentors. I think mentors can be really helpful in helping you navigate out of things that are really non-productive uses of your time, particularly for women, since and particularly in the context of committee responsibilities with inside the university, where I think many of us spend far too much of our time. I'm happy to do committee responsibilities outside my university. I've done lots for EIB and continue to do lots for EIB, even when I'm not on the committees. But that I see very differently. That's giving back to an association that I know and love, where I really do want to make a difference. But internal committees, I would be very careful in evaluating why they want you to be on this committee and whether you should be doing this or not.
Thank you. I'm sorry that my camera doesn't work, but I've been nodding the whole time. So thank you. That was a big help. Thanks.
Great.
You know, always ask your mentors for advice, and they're, you know, going back to them is very helpful on that.
So we have time maybe for one more question. There's nothing in the chat. So if someone wants to maybe unmute themselves and ask a question, then now would be a good time. Otherwise, I think we're probably done then. And I'm concluding so that we can also move over to the General Assembly and the award ceremony, which is starting in 5 minutes. So thank you so much, Lorraine. This has been really a great session. I learned so much. It was great preparing for the session as well, meeting you beforehand, learning about your career and your life choices and what's happening in your life right now. This has been an eye-opener for me as well, for me as a young scholar, also planning my future and knowing that I don't need to panic right now if I don't have so much relevance, but I'm focusing on rigor because I can get relevance later. And I know that because I can do that once I have rigor. And so this has been great for me in my stage of life. And I hope you also learned so much as well from any stage of life and career you are right now. Take away a lot. And thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I'm in my middle-age crisis right now. I also learned a lot. You just answered the question that's been bothering me ever since I turned 50. So thank you, Lorraine.
Well, I don't know what the question was, Dana, but
I'll take it later personally online.
But yeah, I'm just thank you for inviting me. It's been a real thrill and opportunity. I know when Kirsten contacted me, I said, why do you want to interview me? I'm a little girl from a town of 3,000 people, and sort of no one knows where it is. And you know, I don't think I've done anything particularly remarkable. So I'm delighted to have been asked to do this, and I do encourage people to think about broadening what you do. Don't do it early, but think of your life as opening up like a flower. And then think about the things and the ways that you can have fun. You know, we want to have fun. You want to make a difference. And then my last comment is, don't worry so much.
It comes with age.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.